So there's been a few times that I've been driving around a road somewhere and I see something on the side of the road that's abandoned, like an old house that's covered in graffiti. Or in Baker, California, when I'm driving to Las Vegas, there is an abandoned motel that's really, really cool. In fact, on the way to Vegas, there is an abandoned water park. And every time I pass these things, I think to myself, man, I wish I had my camera. One time, I actually in Baker did get to photograph that motel. Unfortunately, it's been boarded up and surrounded by chain link fence now, so I can't do that anymore. But here's the thing. I've never been able to photograph these abandoned type things like today's guest. Today, we dive into photographing abandoned places. Let's go behind the shot. Hi, welcome to Behind the Shot. I'm Steve Brazill. This is the show where we try and get inside the mind of a great photographer by taking a closer look behind one of their shots, from conception to completion, and all those stories and challenges that happen in between. This episode, like every episode, has a blog post associated with it. If you go to behindtheshot.tv, find this episode. I write a little bit about my guest. Any links that we mention are in there. There's a small sample gallery of my guest's work. Again, it's behindtheshot.tv. By the way, the links that we mention are also in the description on YouTube. If you are watching on YouTube, just head down below the like and subscribe button. On your way down, if you take the time to hit those, hit the alert so that you know when I release something new. And also in the description on YouTube, I always, on every one of my videos, put chapter timestamps so you can jump to the section of the video that you happen to be interested in. So let's get started. Please welcome back to the show our returning guest, California-based night photographer Ken Lee. Ken, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing great, and I'm honored to be here. Thank you very much, Steve. Good to see you.
It's good to see you too. It's so nice to have you back because you've been on the show before. In fact, you've been a listener and watcher of this show for a while. In fact, I looked back. I totally forgot about this, by the way. You've won some of the contests that I've done over the year. I think it was, did you win a Red River paper thing or something?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And the way we originally met, and we've known each other for a while now, but our mutual friend, Mike Martin, who works for Casio, amazing photographer, by the way, go find Mike Martin and follow him. But Mike tweeted way back in, when it was a tweet still, back in 2020 that I should have you on the show. And that's when we did our first show. That first show we did, we used for the photo that we were going to discuss, the cover of your first book, which was Abandoned Southern California, The Slowing of Time. And I do want to mention the subtitle because this is going to continue through. America Through Time is the subtitle. Since that show, am I correct? You've got 3 other books now?
That is exactly right. Yeah, so 4 total.
Four books total. You're beginning to sound like Rick Salmon. You're making so many books. So book number 2 was Abandoned Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, California Revealed. Again, the same subtitle, America Through Time. Book number 3, Route 66 Abandoned, Under a Western Moon, same subtitle, America Through Time. And then with book 4, which, by the way, we're going to talk about the cover of this book in today's show.
That's right.
Book number 4, you changed the subtitle. Book number 4 is Abandoned Roadside Attractions Under a Southwest Moon. And the subtitle is Abandoned Union. Tell us about this book a little bit.
That's actually the publisher. What you're calling the subtitle is actually one of the wings of Fonthill Media and Arcadia Publishing. So that's actually not my subtitle to the book.
So tell me about the book, the newest book, a little bit.
The newest book is about obviously abandoned roadside attractions, although I fudge a little bit on that. But basically, it began with my fascination of roadside attractions stemming back to when I was a kid. One of the things that really triggered it for me was getting a chance to go to Bedrock City in Arizona on the way to the Grand Canyon and photographing that when it was sort of between owners. And that really kind of got me going on photographing abandoned roadside attractions. And that abandoned water park that you mentioned on the way to Las Vegas, I photographed that as well. And in fact, that's both these things are in this book.
It's, the water park. I remember when the water park was open, right?
Right.
The lake out in front, it's this very narrow lake, very long, and they used to do oval speedboat racing in that lake. And now that water park with the giant Coca-Cola can is completely abandoned, covered in graffiti, and just an amazing photographic subject. So congratulations on the new book. Again, we're going to be
Thank you.
talking about the cover shot of the book today, but congratulations on having 4 books. I have a total of 0 myself.
That water park, I just want to go back to that for a second. Did you know that they used to have these slides in which you were supposed to stand up and go down the slides doing about 50 miles per hour?
Standing?
Standing.
Oh, I did
Which
not
is
know that. See,
complete madness. And you know, a water park that would open today would never ever have that.
no. And the thing is, some of the best water parks just aren't open anymore. There used to be a water park, and now we're going into a rat hole, but it's totally worth it.
Well, you know,
There used to be a water park on the Strip right next to the Sahara Hotel in Las Vegas that was one of, hands down, the best water parks I've ever been to. And unfortunately, a lot of those are closing. I want to get into, before we get into the shot, for those of you that have never watched the show before, I should probably explain. Yes, we're going to dissect that photo, but I always start with getting to know the photographer a little bit. I know Ken, but you may not. And I want you to understand who Ken is, what he's about, and kind of how he thinks about photography, because then it helps you understand why you should listen to this person. So I want to start here. And I don't think the first time that you were on, I asked you this question, but I asked this of most of my guests, if not all of my guests now. In general, what makes a photograph great?
okay. No, you didn't ask that last time. So I'm going to answer several different one thing necessarily. Um, Obviously, great composition, and what composition basically is how you arrange things within a frame to draw interest to the viewer and allow them to basically wander around your image and not detract from the message and vision that you have. Great lighting. I mean, after all, it's in the it's in the name photograph. Great lighting turns the mundane into the magical, and obviously, nowhere is this more true than when you light paint your subject during night photography. Light is part of the word in photography, as I mentioned, and the only difference is with night photography, you're capturing light over a long, extended period of time, perhaps minutes, perhaps hours. So you're basically like the director in your own film. And then I think, especially for night photography, but maybe with anything, it's creating a world that draws the viewer in and evokes a strong emotional response. It's something that makes you want to be completely wrapped up in the world that you're seeing. It's about feel and it's about atmosphere.
So you said a sentence there that I dig. It's
Oh
kind
yeah.
of like directing your own film. I,
Oh
I,
yeah.
I wish more photographers thought that way,
Mm.
because however you want to interpret that sentence, what it invokes to me is you have control, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, more than anything, directing your own film means you're the one in control. And yes, even if it's photojournalism where you may not have control of the scene, you have control of the lens, you have control of how much of that scene you show, you have control of the angle that you shoot it at, you have control of the tangential items or artifacts that you include in the photo. And if it's not photojournalism, then you have control. And I really wish that more people would look at their photography that way. But hey, just me. So before we started, and when I asked you to do this, you went, what? But you're the third person to do this. And
Right.
I want to do it again, because the other first 2 times that I did what we're about to do, I thought to myself, I don't know if this is going to work. I mean, it's a crapshoot. It just was an idea that I had. I've gotten many comments on the first 2 episodes of how the guests did this. So I had you write down 6 terms. The terms are technical execution, storytelling, creativity, impact, composition, and lighting. 6 different terms. What I would like you to do, and take as much time as you need, I don't care about dead air, because
Okay.
dead air to me is not dead. Dead air to me
Right.
in this particular instance is hearing you think, which is powerful.
Right.
I'd
It's
like
part
you
of the
to rank
conversation.
those. Say that again.
It's part of the conversation.
Really, honestly, hearing somebody think is part of the conversation. Exactly it. By the way, there is a little bit of a lag, folks. So if we step on each other, my apologies. what I'd like you to do is rank those in order of importance to you,
Oh boy.
starting
All
with number
right.
6 and working your way to number 1. So what
Got
would
it.
you
Okay.
put? I'm not saying it's unimportant, but out of those 6 terms, what would be the 6th item to you?
Hmm. I'm going to go with, I almost said I'm going to go with six. Um, the first
As
one,
one
I,
does. Yeah.
yeah, I think the first one might be, believe it or not, technical execution.
You'd
I
put
know
that
that
6th?
maybe, yeah.
Okay.
Ooh,
Why?
because I think if you can otherwise create an image that has storytelling and impact, and you can already tell by what I'm saying what I value. Um, I think technical execution is less important. Like for example, if you think of some of the really great photos in history, like I don't know why, but the one that comes to mind is the one where Muhammad Ali is standing in a ring, triumphant over his
Yep.
opponent that he's
He's
just
over Sonny
defeated.
Liston. Yeah.
That's it. And technically, it's grainy and maybe I don't. I'd have to see it again, but maybe some of the blacks are crushed. I don't know, but it's not technically perfect. But storytelling, the impact, that's all there in that photo. And I'm sure your listeners can think of a lot more examples, but that's why technical execution, don't get me wrong, it's really important and it's very important in night photography, but I think it's the least important.
I don't disagree with you. And I use the Muhammad Ali Sonny Liston shot, Napalm Girl, Kent
Mm.
State, Tiananmen
Oh, yeah,
Square.
Napalm Girl.
I
Yes,
use
yeah.
all of those for the same reason, but specifically to noise when I tell people ignore the noise. The most
Mm.
iconic shots of our day, some of the most iconic shots of our day, or at least my day, are grainy. I won't call it noise, but grainy, blurry, not technically perfect. And no one ever looks at those photos and says that's not technically perfect, right?
Right.
As Rick Salmon said to me once, I think his dad said to him, if the first thing people notice in your photo is the noise, there's something else wrong with your photo, right? And that's kind of
Oh,
true.
yes, yes. Yeah, Rick Salmon is exactly right with that.
So what would you put number 5?
Ugh. Can they all be tied for one?
No, they cannot.
Yeah, I know. Oh man. From here it gets very difficult. So oh boy. Okay. This is going to sound insane coming from someone who does night photography with light painting, but I might go with lighting, maybe lighting fifth. I
Okay.
don't
Number
know.
4.
Four is, ooh, I'm looking at the list here. Four is, again, I think this sounds insane, but I'm going to go with composition because I think sometimes you can have an odd composition, but still have impact and creativity and storytelling. Uh, so creativity would be number three. Number two is storytelling, and number one is impact. Or I could
Okay.
reverse those last two, but let's go with that.
Okay. Sounds good. I think most people will choose impact number 1, but I do know of a couple people in my head that, no names being mentioned, that
Yeah.
probably would not put impact number 1. So it's just going to be interesting as I do this over time to kind of see what trends are there. So let's get into today's shot. Before we do, just a quick reminder for you. This show is available wherever you get your podcast. You can find all the ways that you can subscribe either to the video podcast or the audio only podcast over at behindtheshot.tv. Of course, again, at the website, there is also a blog post with this episode that talks about Ken, shows a sample gallery of his work, yada, yada, yada. If you're watching on YouTube, right down below the like and subscribe button, the same links that are in the blog post, any links that we talk about, will also be in the description on YouTube. So head on down there and get into that. But for today's image, this is the cover shot of your new book. And before I bring it up, I pulled up the EXIF data on this and it showed a name. Followed the lights to the Mojave Barn. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, that's the title.
So, do you name all of your images?
Just about all of them, yeah. All the night images, anyway.
Okay, so this is the cover of the new book. I know this barn. I've actually
Yeah.
been to this location and photographed this barn before. So let's start with the technical stuff. Since it was number 6, we'll start there. You're a Nikon shooter, right?
Nikon and Pentax, yes.
So what was this shot with?
This is a Nikon D750.
And lens?
That one was 14 to 24 millimeter, which is a beautiful lens.
Okay, 2.8 lens, yeah.
F2.8, yeah.
EXIF data showed this at 17 millimeters, so pretty wide. Not the 14, but wide enough to get all the scene in. Exposure-wise, EXIF data did not show your ISO. Do you know what your ISO was?
It was 320.
Oh, really? That low?
Yeah. It's really low.
Okay, we're going to dive into that. Aperture
Yeah.
was f8.
F8, right?
And then your shutter, 3.25 minutes.
That's right.
Is that
3
normal
1/4.
for you to go that? I mean, I understand long night photography, but over 3 minutes of night photography, is that normal for the type of light painting stuff that you do?
It's reasonably normal. It's a little bit on the long end, but reasonably normal. A lot of times I'll go about 2 minutes. And this is during a full moon. It really depends on when during the night I'm doing a photo. So,
Okay.
like for example, if I'm shooting stars as pinpoints, such as a Milky Way, I might go for 15 seconds. So, just
Right.
depends.
Like in this shot, the stars turned into trails, obviously, because you went over 3 minutes. Manual mode, and your white balance is manual. And that actually surprised me for what you're doing with long exposure light painting.
Okay, so out of curiosity, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to become the interviewer. Why does that surprise you?
Because
Purely out of curiosity.
no, that's actually a very good question. And nobody's ever done that to me before. So I kind of dig this. It surprises me because while if you know your light is a static Kelvin, let's say that you have studio lights that you know to be 5,600 Kelvin, or you're shooting in a building and you know everything is 3,200, soft white light bulbs or something to that effect. Okay, yeah, set it. But in this particular case where you've got full moon, you're light painting, you got other lights inside, it's surprising to me that you wouldn't leave it on auto. You're shooting raw. I know you. So you're shooting raw. It's easy to set it in post, either creatively, or boy, that was really weird. Creatively, or to try and be neutral accurate. So I don't know why you would take the time to set the Kelvin ahead of time when you may get a variance from some other light. Does that make sense?
Sure. So I do it largely out of consistency because if I'm shooting a bunch of photos and I'm going to, especially if I'm doing star trails or something like that, I'm going to stack them later. I want them to be very consistent. And if it's auto white balance, it'll keep shifting. And yes, I can shift it during processing because they're raw, as you pointed out. But I want that consistency. And the second reason also has to do with consistency. When I'm looking at the back of a screen, I want there to be a representation that's as close to what I want as possible. And that also affects the histogram. So I want it to be as accurate as possible because I'll reference the histogram once in a while.
Okay, see, I like that last part. Makes total sense to me. I dig that.
Mm-hmm.
Metering was pattern metering. So before this routine, before we actually get in and learn about your process, for those of you that are on the audio feed, I'm going to try and describe this, but let me start here. There is a ton in this shot. Like there are so many things in this shot. There's going to be things I subjectively leave out as yes, they're there, but it's not critical that you understand them in an audio form moving forward in this show. But let's start here. If you've ever been to a place called Nelson Ghost Town, it's just south of Hoover Dam and south of Las Vegas, close to the Colorado River. You may recognize this barn. First of all, I should ask, I'm correct, right? This was Nelson Ghost Town?
It is, yes.
Okay, good. I want to make sure because I recognize the barn. I'm like, what if I'm wrong about that? So, at Nelson Ghost Town, we'll talk about the ghost town in a minute and how it works and everything. But at Nelson Ghost Town, there is this very old, very worn wooden barn that is covered in old signs. And imagine if you have a barn and, there's a long side to the barn and then the short side of the barn, like it's a rectangle, let's say. Usually the barn doors are on the short side and you're looking at the door side with two giant barn doors. The right barn door is normal and it's open, but it's like a normal door, right? And it is open. Both barn doors, the left barn door is closed and it's like a big barn door, okay? Both barn doors have what I would think, oddly, are a lot of bullet holes in them.
Yeah.
To the left of the doors, there's a window. Above the doors, there's like this large Coca-Cola sign right above the doors. And there's two windows, one on each side. And by the way, I said on the left of the doors, there's a window. It's on the right of the doors, there's a window. Sorry about that. Mm-hmm. The Coca-Cola sign is there. And on each side of the Coca-Cola sign, there's also a window. Above the Coke sign, which is rectangular, giant, and red, above that is a smaller, round Texaco sign. And the Texaco sign is just below the peak of the roof. And here's one of the interesting things about this barn I think people miss if it wasn't done the way Ken did it. The top of that wall that the door and the signs and the windows are on is open. It's not sealed, okay? Correct. So that Texaco sign is just below this open area where you can actually see inside the roof of the barn. On the far right is a Goodyear sign, and these are all old, like gas station signs. Mm-hmm. In front of the barn, there's actually a bicycle and a bunch of other like old stuff. To the left of the barn, there's trees, which is nice. It adds that green color to the wood. There's a fence on the right. I got to mention, because I just figured it out right before we went live, the top of that fence is exactly the lower rule of third. And here's what kind of integrates everything to me that makes this shot. When you think of building a barn, normally you would think of taking, wood and putting one piece of wood up and then you tuck another piece of wood right up to it. That's not the case here. There's actually a gap between each of the wood slats on the side of the barn. So you can see if there's a light on inside, you can see the light coming through each and every gap between each and every board. There is light in the barn in this case. Ken lit the inside of the barn. And what that causes is not only light to come through the wall on those gaps between the boards, but it causes a pattern on the dirt ground, which is integral to making this shot work because now it's not just dirt. So you have these slats of these slivers of light, except where the door's open, it's a big warm light coming out. Above all of this, clearly nighttime, sky is blue, but has little star trails, little ones. The moon is top right, but out of frame, but clearly super bright. There's so much going on here. And what I love about this is kind of what I said at the beginning of this show. And that is when I photograph things, I would never think even to photograph some of these things the way that you do. The light in the barn, etc. Did I miss anything that should have been pointed out?
No, I think you nailed it. That's a great description as usual.
Okay. So first question I have to ask, is this a single shot?
Yes.
So this is not a composition, a composite?
No, it's not a composite or blend. This is a single exposure.
Wow. Okay. Wow. So at 3¼ minutes, by the way.
At 3¼ minutes.
Let's talk about Nelson first of all, because Nelson's unusual. Nelson is this place that you can go to. It's very photographic. A lot of your shots are there. The shot we talked about on the first time you were on was that plane. Also, that happens to be at Nelson. So
no. That
was not Nelson?
Elsewhere. No, that's not Nelson.
Okay, because Nelson has a crashed plane too.
It does, but that was definitely not it.
Okay, and buses and cars and a bunch of other stuff. So The way I remember, I've only been one time, but the way I remember Nelson working is you could shoot for 15 minutes for free. If you want to shoot more than 15 minutes, you have to pay. They give you this giant warning, like really intense warning about watch out for this one bush that has these stickers, because if you fall into that bush, we will end up calling an ambulance. They're that bad. You said something to me, though, in email. They charge a different amount if you're going to use lights?
Um, well, we're charged a different amount because we're there after dark when the place is closed. So they charge a different amount, and you have to have special permission for that, arranged in advance, typically.
Okay. So it's basically a photo location. A friend of mine, Chase Walker, had some
Yeah.
album cover shots that he shot there. There's a bunch of stuff. If you've never been, you really definitely should go. So let's kind of dive into this a little bit. How much of this was pre-planned before you got there?
Before I got there, probably nothing. Yeah,
Really?
I really responded to walking around while I was there during the day. I walked inside. I had permission to be inside because a lot of times they keep you out of there. So
Yeah, when
don't
I was
walk
there,
in
we
without
could not
permission.
go in.
Yeah. So, but I actually had permission because I was scouting for something. So I walked inside, and one of the things that struck me immediately was exactly what you describe. It's how the slats are open. There's openings between each of the slats in the front, and that struck me as a really particularly defining feature of the barn, and I really liked it. And I thought, then my second thought was, what if I reversed it and instead of looking outside, I was looking in at light? And so that's how I came up with the idea.
Okay, I like that. But again, you said 3.25 minutes is long for you, or semi long for you. You tend
Hmm.
to aim around 2. So how did you come up with 3.25 minutes? And equally as important, I would argue, 3/20th of a second on the ISO. I get that because you're doing such a long exposure. You didn't need high, even though it's night photography. But how'd you
Right.
come up? What made you choose f8?
F8 gets everything nice and in focus. So it's kind of a sweet spot of the camera. I'm sorry, the lens.
Especially
So
at
that's why
17
it's F8.
millimeters.
Yeah. But also F8, since I'm stopping down a little bit, I'm I'm basically buying more time to uh, well, there's several things going on. I'm buying more time to do my light painting, but I'm also keeping the ISO low. So two things going on there.
And then, so 3.25 minutes was just the byproduct of the 320 ISO and the f8. And it's like, okay, now for the exposure I want. But here's the thing though, if you're going 3.25 minutes, you can't really use your meter because your meter just sees darkness. And
Correct.
so it doesn't know that you are going to
So
walk out there for 3 minutes waving a light around, right? And light
no,
painting.
no, it
So
doesn't. But you're going to love this answer, I
I'm
think.
dying here. Go.
Oh, okay. Um, for this one, I didn't set my camera for a specific amount. What I did is I set it on manual. So three and a quarter minutes is exactly how long it took me to walk inside, light paint the entire interior of the barn, and then walk back out and shut the camera off.
Oh, you were in bulb mode.
Yeah. I was in bulb mode.
Oh, okay. So you okay. That just changes my whole mindset here. So you're in bulb mode. I'm guessing you had a lens cap on. You put it in bulb mode, which means basically the shutter is just open until you stop. You
Yeah.
pop the lens cap off, boom, the exposure starts. Is that how you start it?
Except I didn't use a lens cap, but yes.
Okay, so you turn on bulb mode and you walk out and you paint. And with the long enough exposure and you moving, you don't get body trails or anything like that because the exposure is so long that you've basically disappeared as a human.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So if you don't stand still for if you stand still for about 10% or more, you'll start showing up in the photo as like at first a faint smudge, but anything less than 10% standing still and you don't register at all for such a long exposure. So I'm sorry, 10% of the total overall exposure is
Oh,
I should
okay.
explain that for people. Yeah. So
So as long as you're moving,
as long as you're moving, you won't register.
Okay. So okay. I apologize. Like I'm an idiot when it comes to light painting. I admit it. This is still a guess, right? So you're at f8, you're at 320 ISO, and you're in bulb mode. So it's going to record as long as you do. You walk out and you light paint, you come and you turn the camera off. It could have been too long for the light. It could have been, you could have had places that were overexposed.
Right.
You could have had, the whole shot could have been too dark. It could have been for the amount of light you added as you were walking around, it wasn't enough in 3.25. Or it could have been you were out there way too long. The camera was recording all that light and everything could have been blown out. I mean, I don't mean to sound as stupid as I sound,
No, no, no,
but is it
no.
just luck that when you walk back and you turn it off, you magically ended up with the exact right amount of time for the proper exposure?
It, while there's certainly a little bit of trial and error involved, I happen to know that at f8 ISO 320, I can photograph from somewhere about, we'll say, 2 to 4 minutes, quite easily without overexposing the general overall scene. Because just like any other photography, I'm exposing for the ambient light at hand.
Oh,
This
okay.
isn't different, right? So then it's it's dependent upon me to get the lighting right inside the barn. So as long as I'm not blowing out or overexposing any any particular part of the interior of the barn, then I'm good.
Okay. Again, I'm going to keep diving into this because I'm fascinated and completely confused at the same time. So you've got a light. By the way, what is the light? A light wand or
It is a really fancy handheld light. It's called a Proto Machines LED 2. It's unfortunately not made anymore, but it's capable of producing uh, any color in the RGB spectrum as well as white. So right here, I have it set to a warm white color.
is it a tube or is it square, round?
It looks like a garden hose attachment, basically. It's sort of an odd function, but it
So
looks like a
the
garden
light
hose attachment.
surface itself isn't huge.
It's about maybe 2 inches across.
And how long?
Not very long. Again, a lot like a garden hose
Okay.
attachment. Yeah.
So how do you know? First of all, my mind's going all over the place. First of all, you said at 3.25 seconds at 320 and f8, you know that you can walk out there from 2 to 4 minutes pretty safely.
Right.
With it being such a long exposure, is there a huge difference in exposure from the lower end of that range to the higher end? Like if you did this for 2 minutes versus did this for 4 minutes, am I going to see the 2 minutes is really dark and the 4 minutes is blowing out? Or does that kind of compress into a much smaller dynamic range with this long exposure?
It's a reasonably similar dynamic range, but with 2 minutes, the sky would be considerably darker, which I actually would have preferred. But I was just going by how much time I had at hand. 4 minutes, the sky would be rather bright. But within that range of 2 to 4 minutes, you have enough information either way, whether it's the shadows or the sky or what have you, to pull it out.
So how do you know how long to wave the light? I'm assuming you're just, walking around, light with the light up and you're walking. How do you know how long to hold the light, wave the light at a certain area to get what you need?
I I suppose that's the part where it's just instinct and having done it for numerous years. I know that's not the greatest answer, but there's a certain feel like if I'm inside and I hold the light on one particular area for too long, I'll frequently sense that I've done that. So much so that sometimes I'll actually come out and start the camera over again, just knowing that I've already blown out one part. Uh, so, um, but generally speaking, I don't, I don't, what I like to do is I'll have my handheld light on about two-thirds brightness. So that way it forces me to continually move it, and it's harder to get hot spots or blow areas out. So I don't have it on the brightest setting at all. It's usually about two-thirds for something like this.
So here's the other thing that just hit me is the way this is lit inside with light painting. It looks like there are lights inside the barn.
It does.
It looks like they're naturally hotter in areas or not based on where the light fixtures might be inside the barn. But the
Hmm.
barn is tall. How did you get I would think as you're waving it, to get the same brightness at the top as you are out of the door, that you'd have to hold the light longer at the top because you know, standard inverse square law, not as much light's going to make it that far away. Am I correct? You have to wave at the roof longer?
You're absolutely correct. The inverse square law plays a huge factor in all light painting, and all light for that matter. So yes, that's exactly what I did. That said, there is a second story to this. So I did go up the stairs and climb up to the second story and wave my light around there as well because I had to get the back wall. So basically here, for the most part, I'm illuminating uh, the ceiling and the back walls and then some of the foreground as well, rather than shining the light out through the cracks.
Oh,
For the
wait a
most
minute.
part. For the most part.
So you did do some, but you did not do as much actually waving it straight behind the wall that we see.
Not that much. That was probably only about 10% of it. The other 90%
Oh.
is illuminating the surfaces within the barn.
Oh. Okay. It's all coming to clear now. So, composition wise, the barn is centered in the frame. What's interesting is it's not square to the frame. It's slightly askew. So the left side of the barn is further away from me. I shouldn't say left side of the barn. Camera left of the barn is further away from me than camera right of the barn. The barn looks a little bit skewed to me. You balance the barn being centered with the green trees on the left, which are lit up by the moon beautifully, the
Right.
fence on the right, which lines up exactly on the lower rule of thirds where
The-
basically the door is. So your angle is the top of that open normal doorway, not the barn door height, but the doorway height, like a normal house door, right?
That's right.
Um, compositionally, I love what you did here, but what was in your mind with your camera framing?
I intended the barn to be centered. However, I wanted to also play with the rule of thirds because what you point out is exactly right. The top of the top of the doorway that's open and the fence are the lower rule of thirds. But if you look at I don't know how to describe this, but the opening of the barn at the very top, near the apex of the roof, that one is also rule of thirds.
Yeah, you're right.
So yeah.
Yeah. And then the windows pretty much line up to the vertical rules of thirds
Hmm.
almost.
Hmm.
Um,
Almost. They're close, but they're also about halfway. Like if you bisect it horizontally, they're about halfway in the frame.
what would be fun for me to do? I may do this just for on my own. Would be to bring this up in Lightroom and change the different overlays for the crop tool, because I have the feeling the diagonal crop tool overlay would actually interestingly line up to this one as well. One thing about the night sky, you said it was a little brighter than you wanted, but at 3.25 minutes in bulb mode and the big bright moon up on the right, actually creating rays that are coming in, which I dig. The
Right.
stars are trails instead of points. Was it intentional that you wanted that to add detail to the sky, or would you have preferred them to be points?
In this case, I probably would have preferred them to be one of two things, either longer star trails or points, one of the two. And I actually have a photo of this in which the stars are pinpoints, but of course that's a blend because it takes me about uh, 3 minutes or so to light paint this. So I did do a blend with another photo,
And and
similarly.
there's
So
no way to get points on a shot like this, you couldn't light paint it because you've got to be pretty much less than 30 seconds.
yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. So, and I've tried other techniques too. There were several of us who attempted to see whether we could put light panels and achieve the same thing. And we weren't able to do it after several tries. So
Really? Oh,
light
that's
painting was the
interesting.
way to go. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
And I was the one who suggested it too. So I thought for sure light panels would work, but it did not.
okay. So what's you pull this off the camera, you pull it up on the computer. First of all, are there any apps that you can't live without?
Oh, that's a good question.
I'm assuming you're a Lightroom user or Capture One or
This is Lightroom and Photoshop. I'm trying to remember what I would have used for this. I probably used a little bit of Luminar 4. Um,
okay.
I I don't have to have Luminar 4, but sometimes it just adds a little something something. I have a couple of presets that I've created for myself, and it just kind of gets me where I'm going fairly quickly, and then from there I tweak it. So it's convenient for that. But I could do this in Lightroom and maybe to a certain extent Photoshop. I probably actually for this one, since it's a single exposure and I didn't do anything to it, I'm not sure how much Photoshop I might have used. It might have been just very little. But yeah.
Are you saying there's very little done in post to this shot? Like, what would you have done to it?
So I would have probably brought up the shadows just a hair and I would have added texture. I really like the texture function in Lightroom. And then obviously some sharpening and that kind of thing. And I probably would have reduced the highlights a little bit in any place where I felt it needed reduction.
It's such a good shot. Congrats again on the book, man. Very much
Oh,
so.
thank you. Thank you.
Congratulations. Book number 4.
Book number 4. Yeah.
So, is there anything else somebody should know about this thing?
But the barn photo in general, no, just uh, I mean, the main thing is to have patience with this. Now, I don't remember whether this was my first shot or not. It might have been. I don't really remember, but just to give yourself grace and have a lot of patience, especially if you're somewhat new to night photography and somewhat new to light painting. It's really important, basically, to screw up a whole bunch of times, so that way you work towards your eventual goal. It's okay to screw up. In fact, it's the law of the universe. So,
That makes total sense, which is interesting you just did that because I'm going to switch gears. I want to go into a speed round. I'm going to ask you a series of questions. Whatever first comes to your mind, whatever your answer is, say your answer, and we go on to the next one. And my first question was going to be your top light painting tip. So, since you just kind of gave one, I'm going to switch the first question. And just in general, what is your top night photography tip?
if it's all right, I've got a few of them, right?
Yeah,
So
go.
probably it's my mind's like starting to fill with them. So the number one is sort of related to what I just said, but it's to relax and have fun. Because that's one of the biggest keys to doing really good night photography is just relaxing and having fun and experimenting. The other thing I would say is to photograph and light paint with intention. Try and think about what you want to convey, what story that you want to tell, what you want to convey, and then execute accordingly. So in other words, don't just stand behind the camera, which is probably one of the worst angles to light paint from anyway. Don't stand behind the camera. Really think about what you want to do instead of just blasting something with light. So that would be one. Another thing is, it's nighttime. So your imagination runs amok, right? So I would say let it do that. Really, really lean into that and let that inform your sensibilities. If you're picturing something and you think, that looks like an odd monster, or that looks like, I don't know what, a space alien or something like that, lean into it. Let that inform your light painting and how you go about doing things. I would say don't get hung up on camera equipment because yes, I have a nice lens with this, but I could have done this with any sort of lenses because after all, I'm stopped down to f8. I don't need a fast lens, right? I can do this with any lens. And I'm doing this with a Nikon D750, which is not, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a good camera, but it's not state of the art. So don't get too hung up on equipment. What's another one? Oh, you really should know your exposure triangle and how to operate your equipment because you're in the dark. So that would be the one thing that you could do ahead of time is practice your equipment and know where everything is because once it's dark, it'll be twice as hard.
Yeah, see, and that's I preach knowing your reciprocals so that if you've got the example I always use for my music photography because I'm in the dark and I've got to change very quickly. I only have 3 songs. Is if you're photographing
Absolutely.
a particular band member and the exposure is spot on, but they're whipping their hair or jumping in the air and it's blurry. So okay, you realize, well, I'm at 3/20th and I'd really like to have 6/40th of a second.
Yeah,
That's fine.
exactly.
If you move it to 6/40th of a second from 3/20th, that's one stop. You got to gain one stop somewhere else. You can get it in your ISO, you can get it in your aperture if possible. And for me, I know that every adjustment of any of those is a third stop. So if I need to adjust, I've had shows where the drummer is a 4 stop difference from the singer. That's
Hmm.
12 clicks. Like I know that one,
Yeah.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I know it. I can change. If I adjust one thing, I know blindly how to get to the exposure that I want. So, biggest photo mistake that you made or almost made?
Oh, oh, another good question. Okay, I have one. Um, don't get a cheap tripod. I mean, the worst thing you could do is if you're using a tripod constantly for night photography, is to get a cheap tripod. So don't do it. Really, the tripod is. I know this sounds absurd, but I regard it as being as important as my lens. So
Makes total
it's
sense. And
going.
everybody that I
It's
know that buys tripods has bought 4 or 5 of them because they kept buying cheap ones to save money. Favorite composition rule if you have one?
hmm. Um, I'm gonna go with. I'll go with the rule of thirds. I'm gonna say also have a really strong foreground. Um, but rule of thirds is probably my favorite, as basic as it is. It's funny because we've been talking about rule of thirds a lot, so why wouldn't it be?
Favorite band or performer?
All right. I'm gonna go with I'll say it's a tie between Brian Eno and Led Zeppelin. How about that?
That works for me.
Um,
I'm a Zeppelin fan
yeah,
myself. I have not seen the
yeah,
new documentary, but I need to.
it's
Favorite
brilliant.
drink? Oh, did you see it?
Yeah, yeah, I saw it. It's absolutely brilliant. It's it places the emphasis directly back on the music, which I really like. I felt like it was a documentary that needed to be done because of that.
Yeah, and
So,
what's interesting, most people don't realize it's called Becoming Led Zeppelin, by the way. Um, Becoming Zeppelin. Most people don't realize it's not going into their heyday. It doesn't touch on Led Zeppelin 4, the Stairway
mm,
to Heaven days, none of that. It's the first 2 albums, basically.
first two
And
albums,
yeah, I can't wait to see that one. Favorite drink?
Michelada.
Favorite movie or TV show?
Oh, I struggle with this one. Okay, so I'll go with Star Trek in general, especially the original series, Next Generation, and Deep Space Nine.
Okay.
How about that? Yeah,
And the final question:
yeah.
is there a photographer that you think more people should know about and follow?
I've got a few of them. Um, Lance Kaimig and Troy Pava are some of the most brilliant night photographers of our time. So I would say them. And I'm proud to also call them friends. Um, the other three are probably going to surprise people considering I'm a night photographer, but I'm going to go with Charles Peterson, who did the Sub Pop stuff. And you might be familiar with him since you do rock concert photography. So Charles Peterson and Herman Leonard in that sort of same realm. And then the last one would be Sebastião Salgado, who's absolutely brilliant. And I would say he might have been one of my first inspirations. So,
Okay.
I, yeah,
I will include links to those four or five photographers,
Five. Yeah.
in the blog post and in the description on YouTube. If you could do me a favor, send me their websites and or Instagrams would be great, so that I make sure I grab the right ones or spell the names correctly when I'm Googling for them.
That makes
Images
sense.
for this show, links that we mentioned, like the photographer pics that Ken just did, will be in the blog post at behindtheshot.tv. If you want to connect with Ken, let's talk about a couple of things, because you also do workshops. You've got your 4 books. All of that is available and has a link on your website. So what's your website? And by the way, for those of you that have been watching video, I have been popping up his social media and Ken's website links and stuff like that as lower thirds. But for those of you on the audio feed, I just want to get them said so that you don't have to go find them if you want to go look him up in your car right now. Website, your books, your workshops, all available through your website where?
KenLeePhotography.com.
Okay.
And there you can also connect with me via social media. So that's sort of the hub for connecting with me in general. That has the books, the workshops, the prints, and some social media links.
And then you're on Vero, Flickr, Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and all of your social media are the same, Ken Lee Photography.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
Perfect,
about
perfect.
right.
Ken, again, first of all, it's really good to see you again.
It's great to see you.
Congrats on the book, and thank you so much for doing this. And by the way, I didn't know that you had this book coming out, but your publisher reached out to me. And so please thank them for me as well.
I shall. Thank you very much.
The pleasure is all mine, my friend. Again, so that you know, any links that we mentioned, the photographers that he mentioned, etc., those Ken's links, all available at the website behindtheshot.tv. They are also in the description on YouTube, along with chapter markers. All my videos, you can jump wherever you want, head down past, like and subscribe, hit the bell, turn on all alerts so that if I do release something new, you know about it. It makes it a little bit easier for you. But again, thank you so much to my guest, Ken Lee. It is always good to see him, and I love his work. Make sure that you join us next time as we try and get inside the mind of a great photographer by taking a closer look behind the shot.